This is Public Policy, and I'm your professor, Dr. Patrick Stewart. The purpose of this segment is to provide insights into how public policy theorists and analysts provide theoretical models that can be tested once concepts are organized and measured. Policy and the studies of how it is formulated and implemented, and then have its effects analyzed, have been approached in many different ways. Here, we see definitions ranging from 50 years ago that attempt to define public policy and how policymakers and shapers go about their business. Notice how these definitions move from generalizations by Tom Dye and his defining public policy as what governments decide to do or not to do, to the more specific definition by Hank Jenkins Smith, considering how policy analysis is the way techniques and criteria are used to evaluate policy options and their selection. Regardless of the definition chosen, policy shapers and makers need to know what policies work and why to choose them. Note that the popular way of talking about theory is that it is a hunch or an educated guess concerning how the world works, not the scientific approach, which is buttressed by extensive research findings. For instance, evolutionary theory and climate change are often seen by the general public as just theories, and not scientifically supported means of organizing information. To further elaborate on this, hypotheses state conditions under which dependent variables vary in certain ways. Models are a number of combined and organized hypotheses, and theories are a number of models with definitions, assumptions, and postulates embedded in them. But ultimately, science comes from the concepts. This is what science is about. It is also why it is hard to get political scientists to talk politics, because talking politics is usually about value assertions, whereas political science and public policy is about what works and what doesn't work, given the goals defined. In the McCool text, the editor gives an example of cars and model cars, with him providing a 2-inch model of a Lamborghini to introduce differences between models and the messy, complex reality that we live in. Here's my University of Arkansas specific spin. If you've ever met a Razorback, hopefully with them behind the cage, you know that they're large, they're smelly, and they're dangerous. It's hard to describe them in totality, although you can certainly call them. Artist renderings come pretty close to capturing the spirit of what a Razorback is, with a 2-dimensional painting capturing the aggression of one of these animals charging through a snapshot that focuses on this element of action. A 3-dimensional construct seen on the right captures more of the Razorback itself by providing information concerning the symmetry and proportions of such an animal, but it does not convey the same information, the same story, as the picture does. As a result, figurines and sculptures do not capture the contextual elements as is the case with the Razorback in the picture. Furthermore, the symmetry and proportions of a Razorback may be altered to affect perceptions. In the statuette on the left, we see there is a focus on some elements. In this case, the ferocious tusks and eyes and musculature of the Razorback. However, in an attempt to focus on the aggression of this animal, this model would not survive long with such a large head to carry around if it were real. On the other hand, the second, more well-fed hog on the right-hand side does not look ferocious at all, although its bodily proportions may be seen as more accurate. Again, by focusing on specific attributes over others in the model, a more compelling but less accurate story might be told. In the same way that artists tell stories with sculptures and pictures, policymakers tell stories by their choice of concepts and measures in a model. Likewise, the presentations of the Razorback in this slide, both left and right, are highly specific to competitive circumstances by focusing on their looking ferocious. These provide either good representations of the athleticism of our University of Arkansas Razorbacks, or the genetics program is something new coming our way. The story told by the images focuses on anthropomorphizing the Razorbacks to allow connections to be made between those having a shared social identity based upon athletic competition. Finally, while we see in this slide that one can eat a razorback and hug them, we can be sure that razorbacks provide meaty goodness and not the sweetness on the left-hand side. And that while razorbacks here are cute, cuddly, and wear a hoodie and a baseball cap, they are not as easily accessible in reality. Ultimately, policy shapers, makers, and analysts have to connect with their audience, but telling the safe and more easily consumed and accepted story might lead to a misleading representation of reality. But ultimately, making a model of reality, whether it is a razorback or a public policy, involves making decisions as to what to focus on. Concepts that are chosen to focus on and the variables that are measured influence how something is systematically addressed. Perhaps most important, decisions made at the early stages in the framing of models has long-term effects on how an issue is addressed later on, often many years later on, as this drives future research.